Every time it happens, it catches you off guard. You step outside with your morning coffee, or open the back door to refill the bird feeder, and before you've taken 3 steps, you notice it. A squirrel, standing perfectly still, front paws tucked against its chest, tail resting quietly behind it, looking directly at you, not moving, not eating, not making a sound, just watching, for a few seconds, sometimes longer, long enough that you almost feel like you're being studied. Most people think they already know what's happening. The squirrel wants food. And sometimes that's true. But then something doesn't quite fit. Because squirrels stare even when your hands are empty. They stare before you walk toward the feeder. They stare while you're watering flowers, while you're pulling weeds, while you're sitting quietly on the porch doing absolutely nothing. Sometimes they even stop halfway across the yard, just to watch you walk from one side of the house to the other. If they only cared about food, why spend so much time looking at you? As it turns out, that stare is almost never as simple as it looks. Because while you're wondering why the squirrel won't stop staring, the squirrel is busy trying to answer a much more important question. What kind of human are you? If you're new here, subscribe before you leave, because today we're uncovering one of the most misunderstood behaviors backyard squirrels have. Why they stare. Not for a second, sometimes for an entire minute. And what those silent moments reveal about the way squirrels see the humans around them. Stay until the end, because the final reason explains why a squirrel that has known you for months may actually stare longer than one that's afraid of you. And once you understand why, you'll probably never look at that quiet little face the same way again. 1. They're not looking at you, they're reading you. People often describe squirrels as curious, and they certainly are. But curiosity alone doesn't keep a wild animal alive. Careful observation does. To a squirrel, every unfamiliar movement could be the difference between finding breakfast or becoming someone else's breakfast. A hawk doesn't always announce itself, neither does a fox, or a neighborhood cat hiding beneath a hedge. Survival belongs to the animal that notices danger before danger notices it. That's why squirrels spend an astonishing amount of their day simply watching. Not because they have nothing better to do, because gathering information is one of the safest things they can do. Researchers studying eastern gray squirrels have found that these animals constantly evaluate potential threats before deciding whether to flee, freeze, or continue feeding. Instead of reacting automatically, squirrels often pause to collect visual information, weighing the level of risk before making their next move. And humans are one of the most complicated things they have to evaluate. You're much larger than any predator they normally face. You move unpredictably. Sometimes you walk past without paying any attention to them. Other times you stop, reach into your pocket, bend down, stretch out your hand, or suddenly change direction. From the squirrel's perspective, every one of those movements carries information. Is this human walking toward me or past me? Are those empty hands, or are they holding something? Is this person looking directly at me or simply looking around the yard? Can I stay where I am for one more second, or should I run now? What looks like staring is actually a rapid series of survival decisions. The squirrel isn't admiring you. It isn't trying to make eye contact. It isn't wondering what you're thinking. It's collecting tiny pieces of information that help answer one simple question. How dangerous are you? Right now. That's why 2 people can walk into the same backyard and receive completely different reactions. One squirrel might bolt the instant a stranger steps onto the grass, but remain surprisingly calm when the homeowner appears a few minutes later. Not because the squirrel has stopped being cautious, because it has already gathered enough information to judge the situation differently. And after enough mornings, something remarkable begins to happen. The squirrel no longer needs to figure out what humans are like. It starts figuring out what one particular human is like. You. 2. They learn that not all humans are the same. Most people assume wild squirrels see humans as one category: big, noisy, potentially dangerous, avoid if possible. That seems like a reasonable assumption. After all, from our perspective, one squirrel looks a lot like another. But the opposite is often true. To the squirrel living in your yard, you don't look like every other human. You look like you. Wildlife researchers studying urban squirrels have repeatedly observed that squirrels can distinguish between individual people, responding differently based on familiarity rather than simply reacting to every human the same way. At first, the squirrel only recognizes patterns: the sound of the sliding door, the time the backyard becomes active, the footsteps across the wooden deck, the familiar creak of the garden gate. Then those patterns begin attaching themselves to one individual: the person who fills the feeder, the person who never chases them, the person who sits quietly with coffee every morning. Without realizing it, you've become part of the squirrel's memory, and memory changes behavior. Imagine watching from the kitchen window. Your regular squirrel is nibbling beneath the oak tree. You step outside. It pauses, looks at you, maybe hops onto the nearest tree trunk, but it doesn't disappear. An hour later, a delivery driver walks into the yard. The very same squirrel explodes up the tree before the driver has taken 3 steps. Same squirrel, same backyard, completely different response. Why? Because the squirrel isn't reacting to a human. It's reacting to a specific human whose behavior it has been studying for days, sometimes weeks, sometimes months. Researchers believe predictability plays an enormous role in how urban wildlife evaluates risk. A human whose movements remain calm and consistent becomes easier to understand. And what is easier to understand usually feels less dangerous. That doesn't mean the squirrel trusts you the way a pet would. Wild squirrels never stop being cautious. But caution doesn't prevent familiarity. In fact, the longer the squirrel survives around you, the more detailed its understanding of your routine becomes, which leads to something surprisingly sophisticated. Eventually, the squirrel stops watching to decide whether you're dangerous. It starts watching because it's trying to predict what you're about to do next. 3. They're trying to predict your next move. By the time a squirrel has seen you dozens of times, it's no longer starting from zero. It already has expectations. It knows roughly when you come outside, where you usually walk, how fast you move, which door you use, even where you tend to stop. That means every time the squirrel stares at you, it isn't just watching what's happening now, it's trying to figure out what happens next. Prediction is one of the most valuable survival tools a wild animal can have. If you can anticipate danger before it reaches you, you don't have to waste precious energy running from every little sound. Researchers studying animal behavior have found that many species continuously make predictions about their environment, comparing what they expect to happen with what actually happens. The more predictable something becomes, the easier it is for an animal to make efficient decisions while avoiding unnecessary risks. Squirrels are no different. Imagine you're walking toward the back fence. The squirrel notices it doesn't run. Not yet. Instead, it watches. Maybe you're simply checking the garden. Maybe you're heading for the compost bin. Maybe you're walking past without even noticing it. The squirrel waits one more second, then another, because every extra moment provides more information. You slow down. It stays. You reach into your pocket. Its tail twitches once. You bend over. It immediately climbs halfway up the tree. Not because it knew what you were going to do, because it was constantly updating its prediction as new information appeared to us. That hesitation looks almost thoughtful. To the squirrel, it's simply efficient. Running costs energy, especially during winter, when every calorie matters. If the squirrel fled every single time a person moved, it would spend much of its day wasting energy it couldn't easily replace. So instead, it does something much smarter. It watches first, acts second, and over enough time, those predictions become surprisingly accurate. Some squirrels begin moving toward the feeder before you've even picked up the container. Others climb onto their favorite branch the moment they hear your back door open, not because they've memorized one event,
but because they've connected dozens of tiny clues into a routine, which explains something many people find surprisingly touching. Sometimes the squirrel keeps watching you, even when it already knows there isn't going to be any food.
4. Sometimes they're just checking on you. This is the moment many backyard squirrel watchers struggle to explain. You're outside pulling weeds. No feeder, no peanuts, no sunflower seeds, nothing that looks remotely interesting to a squirrel, and yet, there it is, perched quietly on the fence, looking in your direction, not approaching, not begging, simply watching. If food isn't involved, why stay? The answer may lie in something behavioral scientists call habituation. Over time, wild animals gradually learn which parts of their environment represent genuine danger and which do not. That learning never truly stops. Every day adds another layer to the squirrel's understanding of its world. You're watering flowers today. Yesterday you were trimming bushes. Last week you were painting the fence. Every activity becomes another piece of information. Still the same human, still moving the same way, still not chasing me, still safe enough to remain nearby. Researchers have observed that urban squirrels continually update their assessment of familiar people rather than making a permanent decision. Even after months of peaceful encounters, they continue monitoring human behavior to ensure nothing important has changed. That explains why squirrels often seem to watch ordinary moments that have nothing to do with food. They're refreshing their mental map, confirming that today's version of you matches yesterday's, and once you begin noticing it, you realize something surprising. The squirrel often isn't interrupting its day to watch you. Watching you has quietly become part of its day. But perhaps the biggest misunderstanding comes next, because people often assume that if a squirrel stares for a long time, it must still be afraid, in many cases. The opposite may actually be closer to the truth. 5. The longest stares can be the least frightened. Fear usually looks dramatic, an explosion of movement, a flash of gray fur racing up a tree, a disappearing tail vanishing into the leaves. When a squirrel believes immediate danger is present, it rarely stands around staring. It leaves fast, which makes the quieter moments far more interesting. The squirrel remains on the fence, or halfway up the trunk, watching you calmly, not frozen with panic, not preparing to sprint, just present. Researchers studying wildlife behavior often describe trust in wild animals differently than we do with pets. Trust isn't the absence of caution. It's a gradual reduction in defensive behavior after repeated experiences show that a situation is consistently safe. A wild squirrel never forgets that you could be dangerous. It simply learns that most of the time you aren't. That subtle difference changes everything. The squirrel still keeps a comfortable distance. It still watches your hands. It still notices sudden movements, but it no longer feels the need to escape the instant you appear for a prey animal. That's an enormous shift. You've become part of the background of its world, not invisible, never invisible, just familiar. And familiarity is one of the rarest gifts a wild animal can offer a human. Not because you've tamed it. You haven't, not because it loves you, we can't honestly say that, but because after hundreds of quiet encounters, it has decided you're predictable enough to stay where it is for one more moment, then another, then another. Tomorrow morning when you open the back door and notice a squirrel sitting silently on the fence, looking directly at you before calmly returning to whatever it was doing. You may never know exactly what was going through its mind, but chances are it wasn't simply asking for food, it was doing what squirrels have always done to survive, watching, learning, predicting, and perhaps in its own quiet way. Making sure the familiar human it has built into its understanding of the world is exactly where it expected you to be. If you've ever caught a squirrel staring at you for what felt like an unusually long time, tell me about it in the comments. Did it eventually come closer? Did it simply go back to what it was doing? Or did that silent moment leave you wondering what it was thinking? I read every one of your stories, and they're one of my favorite parts of this channel. I'll see you in the next one.